Buenos días, ¿cómo estás? Necesito que yo hable en inglés. I want to talk about give you a point of view on values, valores, right? The great Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung said once upon a time that religion is the most powerful force in human affairs, and it is. Across the world, all the problems we have are basically problems associated with religion. Religion is about values, which means by definition that values are the most important force in human affairs. And there's a reason for this. Values are a crucial part of human nature and a crucial part of who you think, how you think about yourself and your colleagues. The larger context is this. Nothing in psychology makes sense outside of biology, and nothing in biology makes sense outside of evolutionary theory. We evolved as group-living animals. We can't exist outside our groups. So we think about ourselves in kind of idiosyncratic terms, but what really matters in our lives are the groups to which we belong. Culture is what holds groups together. Values are the key elements of culture. So values are about culture. Culture is about groups about human effectiveness. So psychologists study people. Sociologists study groups. Psychologists ignore organizations. Sociologists ignore people. And values are the intersection between people and organizations. That's what I want to talk about. My point that I'm trying to make here not very well is values is an overlooked topic. It's something people haven't paid a lot of careful attention to, but it's extremely important. First thing to know about values is that they're unconscious. People are basically mostly unaware of where their values are, what their values are, where they go. Children just unconsciously take on their parents' values. Culture, people's voting preferences are almost exactly stable over time. You'll think, vote, believe pretty much the same way your parents did because you inherited it, you interpreted it, you incorporated their values without thinking about it very closely. So values are the DNA of cultural transmission. Values are what keep culture together across the generations. And finally, then one more time, values tend to be unconscious. As an American humorist, Mark Twain once said, it's not what you don't know that will hurt you, it's what you do know that isn't true. The values are what you know that may or may not be true. All social improvement involves consciousness raising. I mean, Marxist theory is all about teaching the working class how they've been put upon. The feminist revolution in America is all about teaching women about the values of the society that need to be challenged, right? So values are really very important. So how are personality and values related? Personality characteristics are almost always on. The extroverts are constantly looking for attention. Introverts are constantly hiding from people. Personality characteristics are almost always operating. Values operate when choices and decisions have to be made. So values are important at turning points. So they only come up when choices have to be made. Personality concerns typical behaviors. Values concern typical choices and decisions. Values are expressed in three ways. You're seen in the kind of jobs you want. Values drive your occupational choices. Values direct the kind of organizations you join, the kind of organizations you leave. People join organizations because they have similar values. They leave organizations because of incompatible values. The culture you create for your children, for your students, for your employees, your values determine the kind of culture you create for people who depend upon you. Quality of your life, quality of people's lives depends entirely on the success of the organization. How well you do in life depends entirely on how well the organizations in which you're involved function. Dysfunctional families, dysfunctional careers, dysfunctional organizations, dysfunctional military, dysfunctional politics. We have some issues with politics in the United States right now. What's good for the organization is always good for the individuals in the organization. What's good for the individual may or may not be good for the organization. It's called the free rider problem. In every operating group, in a pride of lions, say there are 5 lions in a group. 2 lions will do all the hunting, and the other 3 lions will just sit around and watch. The same problem occurs in organizations. So what's good for the organization is always good for the individuals. What's good for the individuals is not good for the organization because of the problem of free riders, people who benefits of living in an organization without contributing back to it. So it's a free rider problem. In any case, organizations are defined by their cultures. Cultures are defined by values. And some values are more valuable than others in the sense that some values produce better outcomes than others. So when I say values are better, I mean they lead to better results, better outcomes. There's a very famous American social theorist, and he was from Tulsa. Then on one hand, he was a senator. He was an advisor to presidents. And he did a very famous study back in the 1960s in which he argued that poor families often cause their own problems, that there are a set of values that characterize cultures of poverty, and to the degree that you inherit those values and operate on those values, you're pretty much not going to have a good career. And that was the basis for Lyndon Johnson's whole war on poverty, which was quite an important social movement in the United States in the 1960s. I think the argument is true. It's Heraclitus, my rock and roll singer from ancient Greece, once said, character is fate. Character is your value structure. This is a very well-known phenomenon in social psychology called the similarity attraction hypothesis. It's very simple, and it's very powerful. We like people who share our values, who like the same kind of movies we do, who like the same kind of food we do, who have the same kind of pets we have, who go to the same kind of church we go to. We like people who share our values, and we can't stand people who don't share our values. And I mean, can't stand them. It's a principal factor driving connections and repulsions between people. Similarly, marriages don't work, relationships don't work if people don't share values. Value we like and get along with and can deal with people who share our values. We can't stand people who don't. And it's a major source then of prejudice, obviously. The values are powerful, but values are also really dangerous because they cause problems. This is a really important point. Not all values are equally valuable. Some values are more valuable than others in terms of the kinds of consequences they create. Greed and selfishness are values. They're values that we actually measure. Greed and selfishness create self-serving elites who run businesses and organizations and countries for their own purposes, and they create resentful have-nots in every society. That's just the way that works. So some values produce better outcomes than others. So where did Christianity come from? Well, it came from a lot of places, but the historians argue the main success of Christianity was that it yielded better outcomes for people in ancient Rome than pagan religions did. Christians had a better life than pagans. So values have consequences. Values are powerful, unconscious determinants of social behavior. How do they apply to business? This is blah, 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 but do they actually make a difference in the world of affairs? And the answer is yes, they do. Here are a couple of my favorite examples. So first of all, the guy named Benjamin Snyder used to be a friend of mine, has what he calls a ASA model. He said people are attracted to organizations that have congenial values, and they leave organizations that have uncongenial values. And what you get over time then is organizations become consistently and steadily and progressively more and more consistent. They load up with the people with the same value. So it makes everybody happier, but that also, I think, is the seed for leads to complacency and an inability to innovate. It's a real phenomenon. People join organizations that have comparable values, they leave organizations that don't, and over time you get homogenization. So that's one way in which values impact organizational life. So Boeing was is the largest defense contractor in the United States and one of the two largest aircraft manufacturers in the world. It was a very successful organization from World War I to the relative present. So there's Boeing building airplanes and doing a good job of making a lot of money. Over here is General Electric, which was this runaway conglomerate. It was very, very popular in American business in the 1990s. It was a guy who ruined GE, but although he was named as the manager of the century, people really admired him. And two of his henchmen left GE and went to Boeing to fix Boeing, which was actually doing just fine. So these two guys, Stonecipher and McNerney, brought GE values to Boeing and said they were going to impose GE values on Boeing. GE valued profitability. GE valued the bottom line, full stop. That's all they were interested in was money. Boeing valued safety. Their values now. Valued safety, precision, and innovation. It was a mercantile firm versus an engineering firm. Traditional engineering values. Stonecipher and McNerney said they were going to teach Boeing how to do business. They were going to bring real business values to this traditional engineering firm. They moved Boeing's headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. And in order, they said, we're going to run it like a business and not like an engineering firm. And what happened? It's just been a steady disaster since then. They basically ruined Boeing. And the only way Boeing's still in business is because of government subsidies. This is my favorite example. In 2018, AT&T, which is the phone company, bought Time Warner, and they bought Time Warner for $100 billion. Time Warner would have been HBO. AT&T is an engineering firm. They do what engineers do. Time Warner was an entertainment company. It produced movies and musicals and so forth. On the stage during the change of command ceremony, when AT&T was buying Time Warner, they fired the head of creativity at Time Warner on the stage in this news conference. Engineers value process and control, micromanagement, doing things in a replicable way. Artists value freedom, exploration, innovation, creativity, right? So their values were completely incompatible. An engineering firm took over a creativity company. As the New York Times said, a vibrant Time Warner culture of creative energy and success that had been built over decades was destroyed in months. The deal failed in 2022. It lasted 4 years. It failed in 2022. $100 billion was wasted, and there's still $50 billion outstanding on the debt on the purchase. Just absolutely, a good company was ruined, and lots and lots of money. That's what happens when you impose the wrong values on the wrong company. Okay, you see the point? This is one that comes from a friend of mine. There was a energy supply company in Houston called Enron. There was just a crooked operation. It was running strictly for profit and greed. Everybody was getting rich. They were cheating on their books. They failed. The CEO went to prison for fraud, and the government dissolved their accounting firm, which was called Arthur Andersen. And Arthur Andersen was part of the reason Enron failed. They were just greedy and selfish. So Ernst & Young, which is another top accounting firm, hired a whole bunch of senior people from failed Arthur Andersen, and they brought Arthur Andersen's corrupt accounting values into the senior management at Ernst & Young, and just basically ruined the company. So it really matters who's in charge, and it really matters what values they maintain. The values of senior management drive corporate culture. They do. The culture reflects the values of the senior management. Corporate culture drives employee engagement, how much people believe in and support and work for the company. The news is that most employees in the United States are disengaged. Gallup surveys show that 65 to 75% of employees in the U.S. hate their boss. So disengagement is widespread. Engagement is not the norm. Engagement is the exception. Employee engagement drives every quantifiable index of business unit performance. Every absenteeism, turnover, productivity, customer service, evaluations, innovation. Every important outcome of a business unit is driven by engagement. Low engagement predicts high absenteeism, high turnover, low customer service ratings. High engagement predicts low absenteeism, high profitability, low turnover, and high customer service ratings. So engagement is absolutely crucial, and engagement is driven by culture. Peter Drucker, who was a very smart guy who actually invented this whole field of organizational theory, argued that the values of the people with power create the organizational culture. I've already said that. That is true. They impose their values on their organization. Peter Drucker observed that in business, culture always trumps strategy. Culture is more important than strategy. If you have the wrong culture, you cannot implement your strategy. The culture is more important than strategy because if you have the wrong culture, the strategy just never gets operationalized. So what are the values then? This is the part of the talk that's original that you won't get in the business school. What are the values that define a good organizational culture? No one ever asked that question before. It's crazy. It's the most important question in the world, right? What are the proper values for an organization? And the answer is it depends on who you ask, and mostly no one ever does. Most values research is descriptive. Researchers will come in and they'll do a survey and they'll tell you what values exist in your organization, but that's not the point. The question is what values should exist in your organization. Values research rarely concerns organizational effectiveness. They very rarely show how the values that the organization maintains are associated with the success of the actual performance of the organization. So my view is that the academic literature on values is not very helpful. Here are just 3 examples of commercially available value surveys. These are well known. If you ask a researcher to give you a value survey, they would sell you one of these 3. And I talk to these guys. I know the authors of the surveys and personally. They're just telling you what values you maintain. They're not telling you what values you should maintain. Existing value surveys are descriptive. They describe the values that the organization endorse. What if value survey told you about their values that the organization should endorse? So it's the difference between descriptive approach and prescriptive approach. I can tell you what values you maintain as opposed to what values you ought to maintain. There's a very well-known, very productive Russian mathematical historian named Peter Turchin who makes the case that warfare was the principal factor driving human evolution. Warfare is a constant human universal. The most famous American sociologist of the last century, a guy named Charles Tilly, says, states make wars and wars make states. That's what states do. So human groups always fight. They always fight. The history of every society is the history of one battle after another. What are the values that characterize the winners? Who wins? So what are their values? Very interesting. There's an Arab scholar named Ibn Khaldun who essentially invented economic sociology and political science. He's been rediscovered, as it were. He said that which drives successful organizations is what he called asabiya. Asabiya predicts the rise and fall of empires. And asabiya is social solidarity, it's social engagement. It's just engagement. And the question then is, what are the values that characterize successful organizations as opposed to the values that characterize your organization? A higher purpose. Back to Peter Drucker. I personally believe this. If the only reason you're in business is to make money, you should quit. There's got to be more to it than that. Organizations need a higher purpose in order to be successful. They just do. Otherwise, it's just a soulless Silicon Valley enterprise. So higher purpose, can you talk about it? You have to have something you stand for. W.C. Fields said, everybody's got to believe in something. I believe I'll have another drink. So higher purpose, financial success. Are you able to survive financially in your environment? You have that's the bottom line. You have to have some kind of revenue source of some sort. Rationality, making database decisions. Rationality, technical competence, and continuous improvement. Rationality, making database decisions. You're getting your technology correct. And then constantly trying to improve as opposed. Nations, societies, companies, organizations fail when they get complacent, when they stop innovating, when they stop trying to grow. And then finally, that those lead then to the capacity for collective action. Or capacity for collective action depends on these things. This is ultimately what puts it together. Valuing equality of opportunity. That sounds dumb. That sounds American civil rights, but it's not. That was the key to Napoleon's army. If you do a good job, if you're successful, you will raise. He said every soldier carried a field marshal's baton in his knapsack, understanding that if she did a good job, she could get promoted. So valuing equality of opportunity, that's absolutely fine. If you do a good job, you should be able to rise in the organization. Valuing expertise by delegating downward. That's how you know you value expertise, is when you listen to the people who know what they're doing. Quick story from my own biography. So I'm a retired naval officer. When I was a student officer, I was number one in my class. I did really, really well. I was first in my class. I won the navigational prize. I had a commendation from the Secretary of the Navy. I was a really hot guy, brand new. I reported aboard ship the first day. I went to the most senior enlisted officer, enlisted man, and I said, okay, I'm now here. I'm your boss. What do you want from me? And I'm this guy with, blazing clouds of glory. And I said, what do you want? And he said, just stay out of my way. You don't know what you're talking about. And I started laughing because it's absolutely true. It's hard to run a ship. The people who know how to run a ship are those guys, not me, who just got out of school. So that's the second point. Valuing expertise, paying money for expertise, valuing expertise by delegating downward, listening to the people who know what they're talking about. Valuing innovation and continuous improvement. My favorite organization in the world is Toyota, and their mantra is Kaizen and Jojo. Jojo means step by step, and Kaizen means constant improvement into absolutely essential elements of organizational success. So valuing equality of opportunity, talent can rise. Valuing the expertise of the people who work for you. Valuing innovation and continuous improvement, which is absolutely, otherwise you die. And valuing accountability. And these are the values that create engagement. These are real values. These are not values that obtain in your organization. These are values you have to work to put in place. So what's the contrary example? The rise of the MBA class in American business. Many people, including me, think that the U.S. economy faltered in the 1970s. And has yet to fully recover, and I think that's true. These two engineers I'm citing, the Hoppers, think that the decline of the U.S. economy was a function of the cult of the MBA and the loss of Old Testament values. MBAs have formal business knowledge. They know about the theory of business. It's like they know like the geometry. They have formal business knowledge. They know something. They know about accounting. They know about economics. They know about tax law, whatever they know. They don't have local content. They don't know how the business is run at the local level. They're like me when I reported aboard ship. I didn't know how to run a ship. I just knew how to pass exams. MBAs have formal business knowledge, but they lack local. They don't know what's going on at the level of the shop floor, nor do they think it's important to know what's going on at the level of the shop floor. And they are greedy. And here's my data. This is an article published in the Journal of Management, blah, blah. 444 CEOs of the kind of guys who show up in Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal. 444 star CEOs. Those CEOs who had MBAs were significantly more likely to self-deal, take advantage of the company, to run the company for their own purpose. And they promote themselves at the expense of their organization. And yes, it's real. Yes, it's true. These are the 10 values that are on the inventory. Fame, status, it's not the same. Fun, compassion, companionship. The liberal conservative dimension is important in everything. Risk-seeking versus risk-avoiding. Quality is the things look, sound, taste, feel good. And then science and rational understanding. Okay, so this is our taxonomy of values. Here is the average. This is a group of 30-some-odd entrepreneurs from New York City. This is their average profile. And what you see there is they're really high on power, which means they want to win, they want to create a legacy, they want to get ahead. They're above average on hedonism, which means they like to party, but they're not out of their mind drunk all the time. Look at the score for altruism. That's a really great score. That means they want to make things better for people. And then their score on tradition is low because you have to break rules to innovate. The score on security is low because they have to take risks. The scale called commerce, that's just greed. That is greed and selfishness. And then a really high score on science, the last scale, that's believing in database numbers and database decision making. Venture capital people, the private equity people really like our stuff because they value numbers, and we bring numbers to the table in terms of how do you make decisions about people. Our business ultimately is we reduce people to numbers. These guys like numbers. They like our work. Here's a sample of traditional MBAs. What you'll see is that their score on power is high. They want to win. They have a moderately elevated score on altruism, but they have a really, really high score on commerce, the money thing, which means they're greedy and selfish. And they will not do as well as these guys. This is a specific example. I hope I can make this clear. The Mandarin Oriental Hotel is a really nice hotel in Hyde Park, London. It opened, I don't know, this is about 12 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was failing. And we went there a few times. It was a great time. You come in the door, they hand you glasses of champagne. It was a superb party atmosphere. It was really super high on hedonism. This is the average values profile of the management team. Low on recognition. Nobody cared about standing out. Very low on power. No one in the senior management team cared about winning. Hedonism, it was party central. Party. Really high scores on drugs, alcohol. It was a good time. Low score on tradition, Look at the score on commerce. No pulse on commerce. So nobody in the organization cared about winning. Nobody in the organization, the power score. Nobody in the organization cared about making money. That's the commerce score. And nobody in the organization cared about numbers. That's the low score on science. No winning, no strategy, no drive to win. Complete indifference to the numbers. That's why they were failing. The 9-person senior management team. This is their profile. So no wonder they were failing. The values of the senior management team drive the culture. This is a party time culture with no concern at all about winning or making money. So they fired them all and put new guys in, and now it's one of the best hotels, if not the best hotel in London. Okay, so these are the values that create employee engagement. Employee engagement drives every important quantitative index of business unit performance. Clearly defined higher purpose. Why are we in business? I spent 50 years selling Hogan assessments on the road, talking to business owners. And you'd be surprised how few CEOs can actually tell you why they're in business. I say, what's the nature of your business? Tell me what kind of business you're in. What's your philosophy? Maybe 1 in 10 that actually could articulate why they're in business. So a clearly defined higher purpose is not normative. It's not what people actually have. It's only the exceptional guys, exceptional performers that can articulate a higher purpose. Wanting to outperform the competition, wanting to win. You got to want to win. And staff understands that. I mean, staff like to win too. Database decision making, which is what we sell, turning people into numbers to make rational decisions about people. Innovation and constant improvement, Kaizen and JoJo. And then finally, minimal hierarchy, minimizing power distance, bringing people closer together, delegating downward, providing equality of opportunity, which includes DEI. So these are the values that create employee engagement. These are the values that characterize highly effective organizations. It's sad to say they don't exist very often. Finally then, the values of senior leaders create corporate culture. They do. Corporate culture drives employee engagement. It does. Employee engagement drives productivity and profitability. It does. It all depends on the troops. The staff are the ones that do the work. If they're mad at you, if they resent you, if they hate you. In the U.S., 65 to 75% of employees are alienated. They say the worst, the most stressful, the most awful part of their job is their immediate boss. So these things are hard to get. So values of senior leaders drive the culture. Corporate culture drives engagement. Engagement drives the success of the business. Then the leaders need to understand how their values are impacting the staff, because that's what it's all about. People are often unaware of their values, and not all the values are valuable. Just because you like it doesn't mean it's good for everybody. And I thank you for your attention.
Empezamos con las preguntas. Let's start with the first one, okay? How do you think Mr. Trump's values affect the culture of business in the U.S. and the world?
I think he's reflecting the values of the people who elected him. They're the wrong values. You have to build relationships. You have to make sure everybody can win. You have to create win-win opportunities. These are going to be interesting times.
Yeah, I agree with you. Board members and CEOs want values on others, but are reluctant to live those values themselves. Your thoughts on this?
They need coaches. One of the big things you do with an executive leadership team is to try to get people to try to develop some consistency and some agreement around core values. And these are what we stand for. And if you don't stand for this, then you need to leave the team. We'll find somebody to replace you. You got to have agreement about culture at the top, or things fall apart.
That's right. Thank you. I have another one that says how to measure engagement with Hogan.
Well, I think the way you measure engagement is to measure engagement, which is to ask the staff how much they like working there. The most important single factor in engagement is, do the staff trust their boss? This is all about trust. That's the most robust single index. The degree to which staff trust their boss is the best single predictor of business unit performance. There's only one way to get trust, and there's a whole bunch of ways to lose trust. Make bad decisions and not admit that you made a bad decision. It's really hard to get the trust, and it's really hard to keep the trust. Trust it's the G factor in organizational effectiveness. It predicts every outcome of importance at the group level. The degree to which people trust their boss.
I was thinking about some papers that you wrote a long time ago about those leaders. Maybe we should share it with them, share them with you. Some of you have them, but we will try to share those with you because I think this is a very relevant issue and it's not been published lately in our blogs or so, but I think it's going to be a good thing to do and share those insights about the values on leadership. And here is one question that is interesting for me that says, what inspires Hogan to keep on building?
Well, Wendy and I are both very competitive. we like to win. We have lots and lots of competitors. All of our competitors are, I'm going to say, they can sue me if they want, but they all cheat. We're the only test publisher on earth that has data to show the scores on our inventories predict performance on the job. Everyone else, all those other tests, all our competitors coattail off of us. They try to ride on our credibility. It takes money, it takes time, it takes effort. Do the research to show that the inventories predict performance the way you claim they do. No one else is willing to do that. So we're very competitive. Every penny that our competitors are making belongs to us. And that's what keeps me going. It's our money because they're coattailing on our work.
I didn't know that we both of us shared that, crushing the competency.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yes.
Okay, on your experience, can employee values shift or adapt according to the context of the organization?
No. People's values are more stable than their IQ. People's values between age 12 and age 90 are more reliable, more stable than IQ. The values that you have now are the values you had when you were little, the values you'll have when you die. And people will die before they'll change their values. Actually, values are kind of deadly. I mean, they're really dangerous because they're so volatile. Mess with people's values, you mess with their core, their identity. It's who they are.
This is another one. I understand that the culture is lived every day, and the values are like how people act and collaborate when nobody sees what's going on. So how do you measure the culture and the impact without a survey? This person is referring to a general culture survey, not an MVPI.
The only way you can get to culture is by using some kind of quantitative measure. Actually, I don't think our MVPI is ideal. I think the values that I expressed at the end, minimizing hierarchy, respecting expertise, respecting equal opportunities. It's been a project of mine for the last 10 years to develop a standalone values survey. We haven't done that yet. In the meantime, we use the MVPI as a proxy for proper values, because we can translate it into the right values. We don't currently have a value survey per se. We use the MVPI as a proxy.
Yeah, what we do sometimes at HRTools is to gather all the MVPIs from the people and find out some trends and do some research on, kind of a statistics things, and that's the way we approach values to understand. We have a team report as well that shows us the anchors of the culture that the leader provokes, not with a specific survey as other vendors do.
The actual empirical literature on values and organizational performance are pretty minuscule. I think we have about almost the only data. I showed you the data from that hotel in London. You read it's quite clear. The wrong values, you fail. But we don't have nationwide, countrywide surveys on this. We just have examples from our specific clients.
Another one is, on your experience, can employee values shift or adapt according to the context of the organization? I think you just answered it.
Yeah, no, values don't change. If your values are inconsistent with the values of the leadership, you'll leave or you'll be really unhappy.
We've seen it so many times. People resign because of the values. Well, another thing is how to find balance between the values of younger generations to make a real compromise of those youngs with the companies. It seems that people is perceiving the differences in generation. You know a lot about those studies you have already done with generational differences.
This is for me is an extremely interesting question, which is a the generation of people 20 to 30 years old, do they have a set of values that are quantitatively and significantly different from the values of, for example, my generation? For sure, I can see some real differences. I live in Florida. Actually, we have about 150 people working at Hogan Assessments, and then Wendy and I have 5 restaurants. We have about 150 people working in the restaurants. And the work ethic of the younger people is terrible. Wendy and I worked our way through college. I worked 100 hours a week for years. You just don't see that. I don't see, and our senior managers say the same thing. I don't know what, maybe it's just too much affluence, too much just taking the life for granted. They just don't want to work. I have a grandson, my own grandson. He's never had worked a day in his life. He was going to go to college. He said, don't you think you need to get a job? Well, I might, but he's never worked a day. I asked him, how do you think you're going to earn a living? I asked his mother, my daughter, how's he going to support you? It'll all work out. No, it won't. If you fail to plan, you fail. I don't have any hard data on my own. All my anecdotal experiences, the younger people today, our best employees are all immigrants. And you can't teach work ethic. If they're 20 years old and they don't have a work ethic, they're never going to have one. It's values again. They're really, really stable. So I personally worry about the future of society. But I know it's the same in England. I know it's the same in France and Germany. So
I think it's all over.
I do too.
Okay. And this question is related to what you just explained, and how can we foster a sense of responsibility and leadership on the new generations, which is, I think, I just read it, but I think it's just about the same thing. Do you have anything to add to it?
Well, I think in the old days, historically, in the history of the species, it was role models. You looked at the elders of the tribe and you said, I need to be like them. But these days, the young people have convened their own group where they talk to each other, and their role models are people who look and act just like them. It's possible for civilizations to fail. That's what Asavia was all about. The term Asavia means differences at the organizational level of successful and unsuccessful tribes, groups, organizations, cultures. So they can have those values, but in the long term, bad things are going to happen. Norte Americanos are going to be taken over by people who work harder, are more strategic, and more planful, and want it more.
Good, thank you. And this is the last question, which is, I think, like a good question to close it up. When we want to make a change in the environment or the climate, or organizational climate, I guess, in improving the leadership of a person, is it possible for the person to modify their behaviors if their values are aligned with the culture? Let's say HPIGS not aligned and MBPI yes. Well, that's what I read.
There are 2 jokes. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 1, but the light bulb has to really want to change. Second point is, do personalities change over time? The answer is yes. Over time, you become more like yourself. And then the third thing is, if you want to change, then you need any intervention at the individual or organizational level has to start with a proper assessment. And there are small changes you can make. When I was younger, I was very aggressive. And I didn't know how aggressive I was. And I got some assessment feedback that said, you're too aggressive. And I thought, My ex-wife said, yes, that's true. And I dialed it back. I really did. And things got better from there. So, small things. You can make small changes. But I'm still, underneath it all, I'm still pretty aggressive.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We had a great time together. Let's go back there, and Wendy will follow. Thank you. Gracias.